Welcome to Whiskey Cast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie, and this is episode number 945 for May 1st, 2022. Coming up in a few minutes.
It's one of those things where, yes, we should have stuck to our guns and said, look, you can only order online. But she played the whole sob story card, and she really needed this stuff for a wedding, and if we were going to be down there anyway, instead of worrying about that, she could just come and get us directly. So we agreed. Stupidly.
True crime podcasts are popular these days, and we're going to combine whiskey and a crime story on this week's episode. We're also closing the loop on a story we first reported back in early 2020 when Idaho State Police arrested Jonathan and Cindy Bray on felony charges of illegally selling alcohol out of a Coeur d'Alene storage unit. In April, the case was dismissed after the Brays served 6 months of probation following guilty pleas to a reduced misdemeanor charge. And now, Jonathan Bray can talk about the case for the first time. We'll have his side of the story, along with a response from the prosecutor in the case, on Whiskey Cast in Depth. That's coming up along with the What I'm Tasting This Week department, your voice, behind the label, and...
Never in the history of our community of Bardstown and Nelson County has there been this large of an investment in one development.
The news is next on this week's Whiskey Cast.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Robin Redbreast? You may have seen me around. Face label, label face. Yeah, that's the one. I'm now contractually obligated to be their spokesbird. Yeah, my agent didn't read the small print.
Proud sponsor of Whiskey Cast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Dewar's brand ambassador Gabriel Cardarella here. And as the weather starts to finally warm, I wanted to remind everyone of one of the best ways to float in a pool with your favorite whiskey. The Dewar's Highball is simple and refreshing. Anyone can make it. Dewar's, ice, club soda, and a citrus garnish is all you need. Cheers.
Let's get started with the news. It's brought to you by the Dalmore. Heaven Hill announced plans this week to bring its distilling operations back to Bardstown, Kentucky for the first time since the 1996 fire that destroyed the original Heaven Hill Springs distillery. Groundbreaking is set for June on the $135 million project to be built on a 61-acre site just east of Bardstown Community Park along Highway 245. The distillery will start with an annual production capacity of 10 million proof gallons of spirit, with the ability to expand to up to 30 million proof gallons as needed over time. Heaven Hill's Josh Hafer told me after the announcement that while they did look around at other cities, Bardstown was the logical frontrunner for the new investment.
You've been around Heaven Hill long enough to know that we take great pride in being a part of the Bourbon Capital of the world. It's where we were founded. Our old distillery and our bottling operations and a disproportionate amount of our team members are there in Bardstown and Nelson County. And so it was important for us to have this homecoming to Bardstown with this distillery because it plays such a big role in our success. The people, our team members, the community. It's very important for us to have our base there in Bardstown. And we did look around because, you know, as a growing company, you can't just rely on, you know, we're going to go find some space there in Bardstown and that's where we're going to settle our roots. But at the end of the day, it was important for us to be in Bardstown. And quite frankly, we're a little bit closer to the city center now than even old Heaven Hill Springs was.
Obviously, there's still a lot of questions that have to be answered here. Things like where Connor O'Driscoll, your master distiller, is going to be based, whether this will have separate distillery manager or whether Connor will stay up at Bernheim. How does Bernheim fit into the future? Is it going to continue to make bourbon? Is it going to be used for your other products? What's the future?
Well, the future is dependent on Bernheim remaining, you know, a world-class distillery. We have no intention of producing anything other than American whiskey over at Bernheim. We do age some brandy there, but by and large, Bernheim remains a critical part of our future. And as far as the unanswered elements of this plan, we really wanted to get out in front of this announcement. We had a public meeting that was to get some zoning change and then get this information out to the people who really appreciate and understand the significance of Heaven Hill announcing a new distillery that hasn't been in Bardstown for nearly 30 years. Our American whiskey is our heart and soul, and Bardstown is, the hometown for us. And this really is an amazing homecoming for Heaven Hill that we couldn't be more proud of. And so, we got through that public meeting and took the opportunity to share this, in spite of the fact that some of those things, remain unanswered. Is Connor going to be, commuting now 45 minutes or 10 minutes? Those sorts of things, we know Connor's going to continue to make good whiskey wherever he is. So those are easy questions to answer in the future. But we wanted to get the bones of this information out because we're so proud of this announcement.
Bardstown Mayor Dick Heaton welcomed the news. He told me it's the single largest economic development project in Bardstown's history.
I think that sends a message that, we are the Bourbon Capital of the world, and it's not just something we talk about, but we have earned that recognition because of all the number of distilleries that have been here both a long time, but also many have been started in the last 10 years, and they also are going through a tremendous amount of growth. So I think it does give us a place in Kentucky and in this region of the country where people can look at maybe a smaller community that's not just on the major interstates like I-65 and 75 that go through Kentucky and 64. But you can come to cities like Bardstown and be treated right. We have very talented people on staff at both the city and county level. And we have some great construction companies based here that can help handle these kind of developments.
The new distillery is expected to open in 2024. It will not have a visitor's center at first, but Josh Hafer did not rule out offering tours of the new distillery that would start from the Heaven Hill Bourbon Experience on the company's Loretto Road headquarters campus. There's also another major distillery project to mention this week in Scotland, where Chivas Brothers has announced plans to expand production at both the Aberlour and Milton Duff distilleries in Speyside. The $110 million project will see a new stillhouse built at Aberlour that should double annual production to around 8 million liters of alcohol each year, along with a brand-new visitors center. The Milton Duff project will see an all-new distillery built next to the current plant. It'll add 10 million liters of production capacity for use in blending. Milton Duff is one of the key whiskeys in Ballantine's and other Chivas Brothers blends. Both distilleries will be built using sustainable technology designed to reduce the carbon footprint to as close to zero as possible. The projects are expected to be completed in mid-2025. On the sustainability front, Diageo has announced plans to phase out the cardboard gift boxes that many of its premium whiskeys come in. The move will help reduce packaging waste as Diageo tries to become more carbon neutral. There's also an update on the paper-based Johnnie Walker bottles that Diageo has been testing. Those tests have been successful so far, and Diageo plans to start rolling them out sometime next year. Compassbox has a new majority owner, along with a new CEO. Bourbon Capital has acquired a majority stake in the whiskey maker. Spirits industry veteran Maurice Doyle has been installed as CEO to work alongside founder and chief whiskey maker John Glazer. Bourbon Capital founder Manish Rungta said in a statement that the investment group's involvement will allow Compassbox to expand its opportunities for innovation. No one was available for interviews as of our recording time. New whiskies of note this week. Irish Distillers has unveiled the third in its Silent Still series of whiskies, featuring the final casks of whiskey from the Old Middleton Distillery. I talked with master distiller Kevin O'Gorman about this latest release.
We have 6 chapters in the whole Silent Distillery collection. Chapter 1 was launched in 2020, Chapter 2 last year in 21, and now we have Chapter 3. And there's 3 more to go, with the last one, Chapter 6, which will be out in 2025, which is the 200th anniversary of Midland Distillery. So 6 chapters, and these are the very last whiskey that was distilled in the old Middle Distillery, which shut down in 1975. So these are the last casks that we have. Very, very special whiskies. Would have been distilled by Max Crockett, who was Barry Crockett's father. Really, really exceptional whiskies. With Chapter 3, the one we've here in front of us, this is 47 years old. Chapter 1 was 45, Chapter 2 was 46, Chapter 3 is 47, and you can work out the rest for the next 3 chapters. So this is a 47-year-old. It has spent its life in a refill American cask and a refill American bourbon cask and a refill Oloroso sherry butt. And they were then combined at the end, put together to give you this wonderful whiskey. It's a single pot still. It's bottled at about 55.7%. And it's just an amazing history. I suppose what we're tasting here, Mark, is history. It was distilled in that huge copper pot still in the old distillery, which you know well. It's about 140,000 litres. And I suppose just an amazing, amazing history.
Chapter 3 will go on sale via ballot at the Middleton Very Rare website starting Tuesday for $51,000 a bottle. It'll also be available at a handful of retailers in Ireland, the UK, Europe, and Singapore. I had the chance to taste it with Kevin O'Gorman, and I'll share my tasting notes later on. Suntory is releasing a new version of its AO World Blended Whiskey. AO's Smoky Pleasure adds smoky whiskeys to the blend from Suntory's distilleries around the world. It'll be out on June 7th and will sell via Decanta for around $200 a bottle. And the Lakes Distillery in England is out with Whiskey Maker's Reserve No. 5. Whiskey maker Deval Gandhi created it from whiskies matured in Oloroso and PX sherry casks, along with red wine casks. It's available in the UK for £70 a bottle. Finally, we have a couple of retirements to note this week. Longtime Speyburn distillery manager Bobby Anderson stepped down this week after 22 years at the distillery, and veteran distillery manager Alan McConaughey has also retired after more than 40 years in the business. He was managing Glendronach, Ben Riach, and Glenglassaugh distilleries for Brown-Forman. No successors have been named for either Bobby or Alan yet. We wish them both well on the golf course. You can keep up with the latest whiskey news all week long at whiskycast.com and on our social media timelines. The news is brought to you by the Dalmore.
Hello, Richard Patterson here, Master Distiller, Master Blender for the Dalmore. You know, whenever the team and I are in the world sharing our exceptional single malt, we like to keep in touch with Mark Gillespie and the latest news from WhiskyCast.
Join us each Friday night for the Happy Hour live webcast featuring some of the biggest names in whiskey. We start right at 5 p.m. New York time, 10 p.m. London time on the WhiskyCast YouTube channel, our Facebook page, Twitter, and Twitch. If you missed last Friday night's webcast with Matthew and Julie Cooper of Tasmania's Fanny's Bay Distillery and Holly Sidewand of Her Whiskey Love and First Fill Spirits, well, the on-demand replay is available right now at our YouTube channel. We'll have a podcast version out later this week. Time now for the WhiskyCast calendar of events brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling. Tickets are still available for this weekend's Spirit of Toronto Festival, along with Whisky Live Melbourne in Australia and the National Whisky Festival in Glasgow, Scotland. Fred Minnick has his next blind bourbon tasting on the 10th at Rainbow Bar and Grill in West Hollywood, California. And Widow Jane's Lisa Wicker leads a tasting that same night at Westport Whiskey and Wine in Louisville, Kentucky. The Bourbon and Bowties Charity Ball is May 12th in Baltimore, and Benny's World of Whiskies returns this year on May 11th and 12th in Lincoln Park, Illinois, just ahead of Whiskey Fest Chicago, May 13th. Remember, all in-person events are still subject to change on short notice, and you may have to show proof of vaccination or a recent negative COVID test in order to attend. The calendar of events is brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling, makers of the Virginia Rye Whiskey. You'll find their Roundstone Rye at fine whiskey shops in 26 U.S. states and 3 continents, and online, too. Visit the new buyvirginiarye.com site for more details, and please drink responsibly.
While there are several claims to the first highball in the United States, Dewar's is certainly amongst them. The highball trend was born and proliferated in Japan as a more sessionable and alternative approach to enjoying whiskey. Sure, neat or perhaps with a drop of water or two is the best way to enjoy whiskey, but it isn't always the most refreshing. With infinite spins and twists on this relatively simple cocktail, it's important to start with premium ingredients. Our latest innovations, like Dewar's 8-year Caribbean rum cask finish or our 8-year Mizunara cask finish, are both complex, double-aged whiskeys that will stand up to the chill of ice and effervescence of soda nicely. The base recipe is simple, but the trick is temperature. Fill a chilled Collins glass with ice. Add 2 ounces of your favorite Dewar's over the ice, top with club soda right from the fridge, and lastly, throw in a lemon wedge or peel and serve. More time in the sun, less behind the bar. Curious? Begin with a basic highball recipe, then start experimenting based on your personal taste and flavor preferences. Sky's the limit.
Whiskey Cast in Depth is brought to you by Mortlock and the Classic Malts lineup. Back in February of 2020, we reported on the arrests of longtime whiskey importers Jonathan and Cindy Bray by Idaho State Police on felony charges of illegally selling whiskey without a license. At the time, they were using a self-storage warehouse in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, to deliver their Scotch Whisky Advent Calendars to U.S. buyers. The arrests came right before the COVID-19 pandemic hit, and after spending 24 days in jail, the Brays were released on their own recognizance and allowed to return to Canada pending trial. Back then, we only had one side of the case to report, the prosecution's, which painted a story of a criminal conspiracy. The Brays weren't talking, and neither was their lawyer. It took 2 full years for the case to be resolved, but last September, the Brays both agreed to plead guilty to a reduced misdemeanor charge of selling alcohol without a license. They spent 6 months each on probation and paid a total of $5,000 in restitution. Last month, after successfully completing probation, the case against them was dismissed. We've not heard their side of the story until now. After the arrests, I told Jonathan Bray that when he was ready to talk, I'd be glad to share his story, and now that the case has been resolved, he's free to do just that. It's a lot more complex than initial reports had it, and in the interests of fairness, I'm giving him a lot of room to tell his story with minimal editing. After the interview, you'll also get to hear from the prosecutor in the case, Kootenai County Prosecuting Attorney Barry McHugh. Obviously, you got to be pleased to have this behind you now, right?
Oh, for sure.
We never got a chance to talk about your side of what happened.
Yeah. There's the way the system works down there, pretty much it's designed to push people into taking some sort of deal. Very few cases end up going all the way to court. And so, the means that they use are obviously incarceration for one, seizure of property, 2. And then we had the added complication of the fact that we're Canadians. So once we were in Canada, then for the most part, the only way to resolve it would have been to go to court in the US. Which is obviously has been for the longest time problematic with COVID-19 and all that sort of stuff and crossing the border. And so when finally at the end of it all, we're kind of starting from the backside of things, talking about having things resolved, but it was a very long process, and we managed to get the best outcome, if you will, without taking it to trial, which is the outcome that we have right now, which is that the case is dismissed and it's as though it never happened.
Although you did have to plead guilty and pay $5,000 each in restitution, right? And then
actually, it was $5,000 total.
Oh, $5,000 total.
That's right.
Because they had it listed as $5,000 for each of you on the court records. That's why I was asking.
Yeah, it was only $5,000 total. So it was either accept that. They did want $10,000 initially, but we got it down to $5,000. So it was either accept that, do the probation time, because of course, having no prior criminal record, obviously we were going to be extremely tempted to run out and commit another crime. Right. So, the probation period was just neither here nor there. It was really just a period of time. We're not criminals. So, and then that would mean that, the case would be dropped, and then things would be wiped clean at that point. The only other option would have been to go to trial, or if we weren't able to organise a deal and we couldn't go to trial because of the crossing the border issue or whatever, then obviously if that would have resulted in a warrant in perpetuity, which would have stopped us from ever going to the US. So it had to be resolved one way or another. And this was a window that only arose because the sitting judge agreed to a Zoom trial. But again, we're kind of starting from the back end in. But the prosecution didn't have anything, but that the one thing they did have was they knew that we were unlikely to return to the US. So they didn't really have to come up with any sort of a reasonable deal to make all this go away. They could just sit on it. And so when the judge offered a Zoom trial, all of a sudden the prosecution wanted to play ball because they didn't want to go to trial because they had nothing. So that's why we ended up with this removal of all of the felony charges and having it down to a misdemeanor, selling alcohol without a license, and a 6-month probation, and then an expunging of the record.
So it is like the case never happened, then, theoretically, right?
Yep, that's right. And like I said, it was only because the judge agreed, because the prosecution thought for sure we would never go to trial, so they were never going to offer a deal. But then as soon as the judge said that we could do a Zoom trial, all that changed. Because, if we were never going to go and face trial, then it's irrelevant what the prosecution has or doesn't have on us. Because if we don't turn up for trial, then it's a felony warrant, and they can point the finger at us and say, look, see, they were criminals after all.
But this clears the way for you now to come back into the U.S.
If we so desire, yes.
I'm sorry?
Yeah. If we want to come back to the US, then we could.
Okay.
Now, even though everything's been dropped and the case has been dismissed and all of that, I take it that it's still going to be a line item on our record somewhere. So I don't know exactly how that works, what will come up on the screen at, customs when they swipe a passport. I don't know. Maybe nothing will show at all. Or maybe there'll be something that'll show a dismissed case or something. I don't know. But, as you know, customs officials always have complete authority to let somebody in or not. Even if they don't like your shirt colour, they can say, you're not coming in. So we haven't tested the theory yet. We'll see.
So let's go back to 3 years ago, almost, when everything went down at the warehouse. You guys were basically using that warehouse in Coeur d'Alene to try to, or basically as a forwarding point for your Advent calendars, right? Into the U.S., right?
Yeah, we actually need to go back further than that, Mark. Okay. So we ran a successful Indiegogo campaign for our 6th edition calendars. And we had an arrangement with Angel Share Glass in the UK to ship the product to everybody in the US. And they'd been doing it for a long time. They'd been shipping, glassware, but also glassware and whiskey. And at that time, there was a personal import waiver, which I'm sure you're aware of, that US citizens could use to bring whiskey in from outside the US for their own personal consumption. So our route to market was not an issue. Logistically, it was going to be no problems whatsoever until that very year, the US administration decided to put an embargo on that personal import waiver. And so that was after our campaign was finished. That was after the product was already completed for all of these customers. So it had been paid for, completed, and was ready to go. And all of a sudden, Karen at Angel Share Glass finds out that her DHL shipping logistical route to the US is now closed because this import waiver has had an embargo placed on it. So that threw, a wrench into the mix. So we're like, well, how are we going to get? I mean, I'm sure you're well aware that 700 ml bottles of whiskey have been imported personally by people into the US forever, right? It's always been a thing that people can do. They buy whiskey at auction in the UK, or they buy bottles that aren't an approved size for the US, or small batch that was never, bottled for the US market. So at that stage, we were like, crap, how are we going to get people the product? So then we asked around. It was actually William Weems from Weems Malts who said that a lot of companies used worldwide package logistics out of Heathrow, and that they were probably one of the biggest forwarders of whiskey from the UK to the US. So I contacted them and had a long chat with them about the law and the logistics and all the rest of it, and they told me the whole spiel about how they've got a connection with an importer in New York, and everything, all the I's get dotted and T's get crossed, and all the taxes get paid, and the excises is sorted out, everything's done, so it's all completely legit, no problems at all, and they've been doing it for decades. So I was like, great. Well, the only issue was it was a lot more expensive than the other way, with people having their own import waiver. So that expense had to go back to the customer, but they were happy to pay it to get their calendars. So we started utilizing them, and there was yet another wrinkle. There were some states that some states that he told me were problematic in the shipping. And he said the issue is that, he used FedEx, and again, there was a discretion with local FedEx managers whether or not they would receive and ship alcohol or not. So even though it was legal to do it, and I've actually found that here in Canada too, some UPS managers won't ship alcohol samples and others will. It's not against the law, but because it's a challenging controlled substance, some managers just prefer not to deal with it at all. So he said there are some states that he has found he only had like a 50-50 success rate in having the packages accepted. So he just kind of put them on a blacklist to not ship to. And so we ended up having, probably around about 100 customers that we couldn't get their calendars to because Worldwide wouldn't ship it to them directly. So then we got talking about what sort of potential solution we could find that would still be completely legal, but would be able to get those customers their calendars. And he said, well, here's a list of all the states that I will ship to and can ship to legally, no problems at all, without having any packages rejected. And one of them was Idaho, which, is drivable from Alberta. So he actually said, well, if I could ship all these to Idaho and you could just resend them to the customers from there. And we thought, well, that's a great idea. So, and again, we believed that everything was completely 100% above board and legal, because in coming into the country, all those taxes and duties, everything's already paid. We're not actively selling the product. This product's already been sold online. All we're doing is putting a new label on that package and shipping it. And it was meant to be a one-time deal. We meant to go down to Idaho, redirect those packages, and then that was it. Well, the US threw another wrinkle with the 25% tariff on Scotch whisky, which I'm sure you're familiar with. So that caused huge delay, especially in the Port of New York. Customs officials didn't know what to do with the tariff and what to apply it on, and was it on blended Scotch, was it on single malts, and so everything just got backed up big time. So our one trip to Idaho turned into eventually 3 trips to Idaho because of the delays in getting shipments from the UK through New York and to Idaho. So it started becoming a bit of a drawn out deal, which we never wanted. But it just seems like in the world of whiskey, if anything can be a problem to cause things to slow down or to take forever, then it'll happen. It's like even production for us. Scotland is like the Caribbean of the whiskey world. It just takes so long to get anything done. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. So Cindy and I went down to Idaho, repackaged the first shipment that came in, went down to the local FedEx office on the weekend, paid for it all, had it all packaged, and I think it was going to go out on the Monday. So we were still in our hotel. Monday, I got a call from the FedEx manager, and he said, look, I opened one of your packages, and where you're not allowed to send alcohol. And I explained to him the whole situation, but he didn't seem to care. And as I mentioned, they've got autonomy over whether they want to send something or not. So we had to go back and pick it all up. So we did that, and then we sent it through UPS instead, and there was no problem. So the issue came, though, when Worldwide Package Logistics exclusively used FedEx with these extra shipments that had been delayed in New York. They came through to Coeur d'Alene to the FedEx guy again, same guy, and all of our packages looked the same size, same boxes. So he opened them up, and sure enough, it was our stuff again. So So he started getting a bit pissed off, and so he sent that. He didn't even receive it. He sent it back to New York. So we went back to Worldwide Package Logistics and said, look, is there some other way we can avoid this FedEx situation? We just want to get this done. Our customers know they've already missed Christmas well and truly. So he said, okay, well, give me a different address and I'll ship it to a different address. So we actually talked to UPS. We got a UPS address and he sent it back. Only he sent it back via FedEx. So even though it was going to a UPS address, guess where it went first? FedEx manager again. So then I ended up going down to the FedEx place to have a chat with him. He wouldn't even come out. He just sent his 2IC to come out and talk to me. And I said, look, this, I want to explain to you the entire situation. And he said, nope, it's a security issue. You're not getting these packages. They're going back to New York. So I said, okay. And so then our guy in the UK, Worldwide Package Logistics, that was just before Christmas. It was time for him to have some time off. So it took another, month and a half, I guess, before he finally sent those packages from New York back to Coeur d'Alene, but this time he just sent them on a truck. So what we didn't know was in the meantime, this FedEx manager had phoned Idaho State Police and told them an amazing story. So we had somebody buy one of our calendars on Indiegogo by the name of Susan Gray. That was an alias because she was a Idaho State detective. And she purchased that through Indiegogo. And because Idaho was a state that Worldwide could ship to, they sent her calendar to her and she got that. And then she contacted us. It was a little bit fishy because she used a MoneyGram and it took forever to get that through. She made excuses about not being able to use a credit card. We were kind of a bit perplexed about that, but the MoneyGram went through and our bank got the money and everything. It was like, okay. So she got that calendar through the online portal. And then she contacted us and said, your product's really amazing. I've got a really good friend who's getting married and she'd love to buy some of your stuff. And I said, okay, here's the link to the website, no problem. So then she comes back and says, well, I see that, you come down to Coeur d'Alene every now and again on your social media. My friend's got a bit of a budget and she really doesn't want to have to pay all the shipping costs. Is there any way that she could, pick some product up instead of having it shipped? And I said, well, all of our calendars and all of our products, they're already paid for by customers. We don't have extra stock sitting there to sell anybody. Like this is already sold online only. Well, what ended up happening was because of the whole New York delay, we had some customers cancel because they were never going to get their calendars for Christmas. So they cancelled their orders. They wanted a refund. And so we ended up with, half a dozen calendars, 6, and a few bottles. So it's one of those things where, yes, we should have stuck to our guns and said, look, you can only order online. But she played the whole sob story card and she really needed this stuff for a wedding. And if we were going to be down there anyway, instead of worrying about that, she could just come and get it directly. So we agreed. Stupidly. So that was our last trip, I guess, if you will, to Idaho. We were basically going to come down and redirect these last packages that had finally come back from New York, pack up the whole storage unit, and never ever have to do it again, ever. Like I said, we believed that we had a route to market, no problems when we did the Indiegogo campaign, and then that year we just had change after change after change, which kept derailing everything. So we turned up to Idaho, and I guess the Idaho detective, she had just gotten that position not too long ago, I guess, and she was keen to put a stamp on her resume or something, because she didn't actually do any detective work at all. She just went fully on the story of this FedEx manager, and so she never saw us committing any crimes, never saw us selling anything to anybody, but that didn't matter. She still set up a sting operation and entrapped us into that sale that was at their behest. So the only crime that happened was at the behest of the Idaho State Police, and if they had not done that, there never would have been a crime committed, period.
Let me play devil's advocate for a second, Jonathan.
Yeah.
Would it have made sense for you guys to contact the regulators in Idaho and make sure that what you were doing was legal before you did it? That you weren't going to run into any problems doing fulfillment out of Idaho, or that if you needed a license to do fulfillment?
But we weren't fulfilling. We weren't doing fulfillment. All we were doing was taking something that had already had everything dotted and crossed according to Worldwide Package. All we were doing was just putting a different address on it. That's all. That's
fulfillment. That's redirecting it to the end customer and fulfilling the order. That would count as a fulfillment deal. That's why I'm asking. It's just, would it have made sense to contact the state and say, hey, this is what we need to do. Can we do this legally in Idaho, or do we need a license? What do we need to do to make sure we're above board and legal on all this? Would it have made sense to do that?
So I'm probably going to answer yes, but I'm also going to say that, at the time we were going by industry people that had been doing this sort of stuff for a very long time, who came up with the idea for us. And we were under huge time constraints to get this done, as you can imagine, especially with everything going on with the delays in New York and all the rest of it. So we were way too trusting that this was the way to go. I mean, as you know, anytime you start thinking about additional government red tape and what have you, that can just take months and months. So, you know what? We trusted that what they were saying was true because they'd been doing it for decades. And so we didn't think it was going to be a problem. And in fact, what we found out was that what we were doing was not illegal at all. So the only illegal activity was the entrapment from the Idaho State Police. That's the only thing that they had on us. And if we had made one other sale to anybody else, then they would have had a case. But we didn't. And that was never our intention. So, our lawyer found very quickly that there was no law in Idaho stopping us from redirecting a legally imported package of alcohol from one state to another.
Okay.
Because it had already come in from somebody personally. That was not a problem. They could never have arrested us for that. So what they did was, organize a way to have us commit a criminal act. And, the entrapment laws are very clear. And this really was a cut and dried case of that. There are several boxes that you have to tick in order for it to be entrapment. And, like I said, she was fairly new in the job. She ticked all of them, which is why, she basically believed this guy's story, entrapped us into this situation, believing that she would then be able to find a litany of criminal activity that she could pin on us, and then it wouldn't matter. Right? The big problem was she didn't find anything. She got all of, we were completely helpful. We gave them all of our computer passwords. We gave them everything. They went through all of our stuff with a fine-tooth comb and couldn't find any criminal activity. Funny that, because we're not criminals. We're just business people trying to get our product to our customers as promised. So, we spent 24 days in jail and got to the point where they didn't want a situation where we walk away or we win the trial, and then that leaves the state of Idaho open to litigation situation. They also obviously use a lot of manpower in this whole sting operation and all of the stuff that they did for no reason whatsoever. So they took a long time about trying to figure out how they could salvage the situation. Is what it came down to. Our lawyer actually said he'd never seen anything like it in all the time that he's been practicing law, and he was actually a state trooper before that as well. But he had a real hard time with what was going on because they once they realised they didn't have anything on us, then they also realised that we potentially weren't going to come back to the US. They just stuck their heels in. They weren't willing to. It had nothing to do with a justice system. It just had to do with covering their butts after they made a mistake. So yeah, we made a mistake for sure because I should have, just said no. If you can't buy it through the website, then I'm sorry, but we've got nothing to show you. But I'm maybe a little bit too friendly, a little bit too naive, a little bit too, too much wanting to help people out rather than think through the potential ramifications of that. So yeah, did I make a mistake? For sure. Was it worthy of everything that happened? Not a chance in the world. It's hard enough, mate, to run a business, to herd 25 single casks of whiskey into a small box every year, let alone trying to deal with a rogue FedEx manager and a gung-ho Idaho State detective trying to make a name for herself, and then even the prosecution, it was just crazy stuff. So the story that went out to the media, that just made things a lot worse because it kind of it shone the limelight on the Idaho State Police, and funnily enough, they actually had a lot of responses to all of that story. People saying that is such a waste of money. All of the manpower and expenditure used on effectively what was a $3,000 sale of alcohol. But what you heard, the story you heard, came directly from the prosecutor's lips. So that was at our bail hearing. Our lawyer said that he thought we'd be out of there in 15 minutes. He said this should have been maybe a cease and desist letter or you guys we don't like you forwarding packages type email, even though it's not illegal. That would have been like, fine, yep, we'll pack it all up. We're not going to do that. But instead, they turned it into this ridiculous story. So they didn't have any evidence of anything that they accused us of. And yet the prosecutor stood in front of that judge. And this is what the Globe and Mail and the Washington Post and CTV and CBC and all of these people flashed right across the whole continent was racketeering, money laundering, international criminal conspiracy. He asked for a $250,000 bond each. You can murder somebody in the state of Idaho and not have such high bonds. So it just gives you an idea of just how absolutely ridiculous this turned out to be. And obviously the bond judge can't take that bond from $250,000 down to anything remotely reasonable. So I think she dropped it by half, roughly. And might as well have been $1 million. So we're not going to come up with $100,000. So that's what was reported. Not an ounce of truth to any of it. And yet, basically, Mark, it destroyed our business pretty much. I'm not exactly sure why people trust the media so much, especially mainstream media, but they do. So people that we've been doing business with for decades who know us, they know who we are and what we do and the integrity that we have. They jumped on the bandwagon and dropped us like a hot potato. So we basically lost most of our business overnight. there were a few people who stuck with us, and once they actually heard what actually transpired, they were like, couldn't believe it. But even they said that they were shocked and took a moment to even think about the fact that the story that the news was reporting was potentially true, but it wasn't. So who's going to write who cares anymore? I mean, that was years ago, right? So none of those news outlets are ever going to write anything about us or apologize for spreading lies about us. All they're going to do is report the next sensational piece of news from the prosecution about somebody else. And that's apparently what the prosecution does all the time, is they always cry wolf, try and make it sound as bad as they possibly can. And then finally, when you get your day in court, you might be able to have the truth come out. So,
I just want to point out, Jonathan, that we did try to reach out to you guys, and you and your lawyers both said we can't talk about this until the case is resolved. But we did try to get you out of the story,
and we can't because if you think about the ramifications of that, so we're still in the throes of trying to deal with this with the Idaho State Police and with the prosecution. If we go out there and tell the full story and make them look like they made a huge mistake, then we've got zero chance of resolving anything, right?
Of course.
Yeah. So, yes, we would have loved to have told the story straight away. I had all sorts of reporters that were from all of those newspapers and TV stations that wanted to talk about it. But if I had, then we would not have had the case dismissed yesterday, as we did. We would have definitely had to go to trial, but even then, it also jades the judge's view on things, right? Because you basically would be bringing the whole Idaho State judicial system into focus for people in a way that they don't normally get to see. Well, that doesn't help you any which way.
So where do the two of you go from here in terms of trying to rebuild your business?
Well, I don't know if we can at this stage. To be honest, I don't even know if we want to. It's been a tremendously difficult time, and as I said before, for the vast majority of people in the industry, even close relationships and friendships that I had, a lot of them just basically threw us under the bus. So could we rebuild it? Yeah. If we felt like, bashing our head against that wall again. One thing that certainly was taken away from us, obviously at the same time we've had the whole, COVID-19 worldwide issue, which has caused, huge logistical chain problems, which is still continuing today. Even when the world was, if you want to call it, relatively normal, we were always close to the wall on being able to produce our product in time. We had packaging that had to come from Asia to Scotland, and then we had all of these different casks and whiskies that had to come from all over Scotland to our bottler, and then the bottler had to pull it all together. We had to get everything checked, and then we had to have the labels printed and made sure the glassware and the booklets and everything was correct. It was just a huge undertaking, and we would start in January and we'd be lucky if the calendars arrived into market in October. Throw in the logistical nightmares of the last few years, and wouldn't matter how much money we had, we could never have accomplished that. So realistically, Mark, that whole business model is not, it's an impossibility. It's not viable right now. And I don't think the world's going to change in time for us to think about that. The world's a different place than it was 3 years ago, for sure. So we basically have to come up with a whole brand spanking new business plan. And then not only that, we would then have to fight the fact that, the majority of our connections and relationships that we took over 2 decades to build are tenuous at best.
After I talked with Jonathan Bray, I talked with Kootenai County prosecuting attorney Barry McHugh. His office handled the case against the Brays, and I asked him to explain why the charges were ultimately dismissed last month.
The judgment in the case included what they call withheld judgment, which allows for someone to complete a period of probation, and if there are no problems during the course of that probation, the charge can be dismissed upon successfully completing that term of probation. And there is statutory authorization for that. It's usually a one-time benefit for somebody who has gotten themselves in a jam criminally, and that was what was utilized in this case.
Now, does the conviction stay on their records, or was it expunged with the dismissal of the case?
Well, it is dismissed, so it still exists on their criminal history record, but for purposes of representing whether they've been convicted of an offense, they can say no because it's been dismissed.
I'm curious about that because obviously the Brays are both Canadian citizens, and if they try to cross back into the U.S., they could face some questions about whether they'd been convicted of a crime or not. So it's important to ask that question. What happened to the alcohol that was seized during the arrest? I know that there was an order for some property to be returned. Was that the alcohol, or was that the computers and other things that were seized?
Not the alcohol. That won't be returned. The other property would be.
Now, the tough question here, I think, is that the Brays have raised allegations that they were entrapped. And I'd like to get the prosecution's response to that because they're claiming that basically everything that they did was legal. It wasn't illegal for them to do what they were doing, and except for the one case where they sold alcohol to an undercover agent. They will admit that some mistakes were made, but they think that they were entrapped. As the prosecutor in this case, how do you respond to that?
Well, entrapment's a reality, or is it certainly a reality in terms of defense position, but I guess my position is if there had been entrapment, they certainly had the opportunity to raise it and litigate it, and they chose instead to plead guilty. So I think their actions speak louder than any words I could communicate, other than the fact that I will tell you that this was more than a one-time circumstance, and I think the result in the case speaks much louder than after the fact assertion that there was anything inappropriate in relation to the law enforcement actions in this case.
Are you pleased with the outcome?
Yes.
As for the Brays, they still own a parcel of whiskey casks stored in bond in the UK and may try to sell those whiskeys at some point, but, as Jonathan Bray said, they'll have to start over again from the beginning. That's Whiskey Cast in Depth. It's brought to you by Mortlock, whiskey's best-kept secret. Hidden away for decades in some of the world's most famous Scotch whiskies, comes a single malt inspired by an original for a fortunate few. Discover the entire Mortlock lineup at malts.com. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. Let's start off with a couple of Tasmanian single malts that we discussed on the Happy Hour live webcast Friday night with the folks from Fanny's Bay Distillery. These are all single cask bottlings for the U.S. market. The Fanny's Bay Bourbon Cask is bottled at 64% ABV. The nose has notes of caramel corn, vanilla, and hints of tropical fruits and cinnamon in the background. The cinnamon comes alive on the palate, along with a touch of white pepper, balanced by tangy fruits, dried flowers, and a hint of anise. The finish has notes of peaches, lingering spices, and a hint of cherry cola. I'm scoring the Fanny's Bay Bourbon Cask a 92. The Fanny's Bay Pinot Noir Cask is not a finish. It's matured in an ex-Pinot Noir cask from the Sinapius winery nearby, and it's bottled at 64.8% ABV. The nose is fruity and vibrant with touches of raspberries, plums, red apples, and subtle hints of spices. The taste is thick and chewy with notes of raspberry jam, baking spices, and hints of earthy garden herbs and soil in the background. The finish, long and fruity. It's excellent, and I'm scoring the Fanny's Bay Pinot Noir cask a 93. I'll have more tasting notes in just a minute, but first, our tasting notes are presented by Sagamore Spirit Rye Whiskey, and we want to congratulate them on the distillery's 5th anniversary this weekend. They're reviving the tradition of Maryland-style rye whiskey at their Baltimore farm and waterfront distillery. In-person tastings are available once again at the distillery in Baltimore, but you'll also find a variety of virtual tours, tastings, and other experiences at the Sagamore Spirit website. Visit sagamorespirit.com for more details, and please drink responsibly. Finally, let's take a look at that Middleton Very Rare Silent Still Chapter 3 Irish whiskey that I mentioned during the news. Only 97 bottles are available from the 2 casks that were filled back in 1973, and they're bottled at 55.7% ABV. The nose has a subtle oakiness along with touches of black cherries, red apples, old leather-bound books, dried tobacco leaf, nutmeg, roasted walnuts, and just a hint of chocolate cake frosting. The taste is vibrant and citrusy with notes of grilled pineapple, orange peel, Earl Grey tea with lemon and honey, and just a hint of butterscotch. If you add some water, it opens up the fruitiness along with a bit of chocolate fudge. The finish is luscious, rich, and slightly dry with a nice balance of fruity notes and subtle spices. I'm scoring the Middleton Very Rare Silent Still Chapter 3 a 96. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. I'll be adding these tasting notes to our searchable list of more than 3,300 different whiskeys from all over the world. Check it out this week at whiskycast.com.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
So, in Spain, they call Redbreast Petit Roco. It's me, but a touch more exotic. Kind of like a Redbreast PX edition. Finished in Pedro Jimenez casks, adding a velvety and decadent dimension. You know, I won't lie. A climate like this makes me wish I was a migratory bird.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Because of the length of this week's WhiskyCast In-Depth segment, this episode is running just a bit longer than usual, so we are going to hold off on announcing May's Whiskey Club of the Month until next week. That gives you more time to nominate your whiskey club. Just use the contact form at whiskycast.com. Let's open up the inbox now for your voice, brought to you by Scarabus Isla Single Malt Scotch Whisky. Had a nice comment on our YouTube page following Friday night's webcast with the folks from Fanny's Bay Distillery. Prestige Liquors, a retailer in Sydney, posted this. Thank you so much for the focus you are putting on Australian whiskies. I try so hard to be able to share Australian whiskey with my followers around the world. It makes me happy to see our distilleries getting more and more notice. Well, it's our pleasure. I've been singing the praises of Australian whiskies for more than a decade now. Once the distillers down under can get their volumes up to allow for wider distribution, they'll be a major force in the whiskey world, just like Aussie wines are to wine lovers. I mentioned the update on Diageo's plans for a paper-based Johnny Walker bottle during the news, and our friend Bunkai H. Highland Hill tweeted this. If that JW non-glass bottle is accepted by the market, that could have a major impact on the industry. Might take single malt drinkers a while to accept it. Well, I don't think you'll see it used for single malt whiskeys for a long time. My guess is that it'll largely be used for bottles that go to bars and restaurants, since they go through bottles of whiskey much faster and much more often than consumers do at home. If you have a question, suggestion, or anything else you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, you can always get in touch with me on social media. I'm on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at WhiskeyCast, and the email address is comments@whiskycast.com. Your Voice is presented by Scarabus, the unique Islay single malt forged by the whiskey-making traditions of 3 generations of the Lang family. Look for it at your local Total Wine & More store in the U.S. and specialist whiskey shops worldwide. Find out more at hunterlang.com. Let's close out the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and people that make whiskey unique. It's brought to you by Writer's Tears. Jack Daniel's is coming out with 2 bottled in bond whiskeys, Jack Daniel's Bonded and the Bonded Triple Mash. This is one that's going to generate some questions about bottled in bond whiskeys, because it's a blend of 3 separate bottled in bond whiskeys, the Jack Daniel's Bonded, along with some Jack Daniel's Rye, and a bottled in bond malt whiskey. Yep, they've been distilling American single malt in Lynchburg for at least the last 4 years. Now, how can a blend of 3 different whiskeys qualify as bottled in bond? Well, all 3 came from the same distillery during the same distilling season, and all spent at least 4 years in a bonded warehouse. The rules don't specify that they have to be the same mash bill. As long as all of the component whiskeys meet the requirements, the final whiskey can legally be labeled as bottled in bond. If you have something you'd like us to look at on an upcoming episode, just use the contact form at whiskycast.com to get in touch with us. Behind the Label is brought to you by Writer's Tears.
Writer's Tears Copperpot, an 18th century style of premium Irish whiskey, blended from single pot still and single malt. Like yourself, it's one of life's treasured rarities, and what's rare is wonderful. Writer's Tears Copperpot.
That's all for this edition of Whiskey Cast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the calendar of events, cocktail recipes, the whiskey photo of the week, and of course a complete archive of all of our past episodes that goes all the way back to 2005. Get in touch with us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskeyCast. The email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
Classic Scotch cocktails are making a resurgence, and the Dewar's Highball is a great way to brighten up some of your favorite Scotch whiskey. Dewar's, ice, club soda, and a citrus garnish is all you need. Happy sailing. Cheers.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Small batch. How would you describe it? It's like an Irishman's understanding of baseball. Extremely limited.
Proud sponsor of WhiskeyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
WhiskeyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2022, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.